Hey guys, it's Will from Tested.
And it's Norm from Tested.
Norm?
We are going to talk about the new MacBook Air.
In depth.
In depth about everything you would ever want to know if you're considering walking into an Apple store and ordering
Exactly.
a MacBook Air.
So this is the Haswell powered Air. You picked up the 11-inch, and rather than get the stock model or the high-end model or the fully loaded or whatever, you went out and actually got the one that is the one that you would buy if you were spending your own money on a new laptop today.
Absolutely.
You're an aficionado of the 11-inch size. I mean, it fits the way you work. I like a little bit larger laptop, but that's fine. That's why you do the 11-inch and I do the 13-inch.
So when Apple first introduced MacBook Air, as a brand as a whole, it was in 2008. It was like they did that big presentation. They put it in a manila envelope.
Yeah.
It was a little flashy.
It was kind of a crappy laptop.
And it was because it didn't have solid-state storage, and the battery life wasn't great. Performance.
The CPU was real bad.
It wasn't even Core 2 back then. Martha Stewart's favorite laptop, remember?
Yes.
And then, but in 2010, I think that's when everything really changed. That's when the 11-inch was introduced, and so you have this 13-inch and 11-inch, and surprisingly, the form factor for those laptops have not changed for almost 3 years.
Right. That laptop is, with the exception of, I think, one small change that I see, which is that it's a Thunderbolt port instead of a mini display port, visually identical to your old 11-inch MacBook Air.
Yeah, so in 2010, you had the 13-inch and the 11-inch, no backlit keyboards. In 2011, which was the Sandy Bridge one, which I will actually...
Conveniently,
this is the one I also bought, 11-inch. It's different because it has stickers. They brought back the backlit keyboard.
Yep.
And also introduced, like you said, the Thunderbolt port, which is right there, Thunderbolt, which just looks like a display port.
Mini display port.
Mini display port. And then last year was Ivy Bridge, which was a super version of the Sandy Bridge one. Also, that's one you have that introduced USB 3.
Yes.
And also the MagSafe 2 connector.
So the reason these laptops are interesting is that they are actually among the smallest. I mean, there are many laptops, both Mac and PC, in this size, and now the CPU performance is such that you can actually use this as your main day-to-day laptop.
Absolutely.
It's 11 inches. It weighs less than 3 pounds.
Yeah.
And it is a machine that, assuming you're not doing heavy lifting with video editing or huge spreadsheets or massive photo sets or big data work,
or have the expectation of gaming, for example, or previously all-day battery life.
Yeah.
So that is the big difference in terms of internal specs with this year and last year's. One final thing: if you look at like last year's Ivy Bridge MacBook Air and this year's, you basically wouldn't be able to tell the difference on the outside. The only difference, I'll show this really quickly, is that there are 2 microphone ports, dual microphone, that's for voice control.
Noise canceling and stuff like that.
And so when they bring voice stuff in, you'll be able to use,
so could you not do the double tap on the command key to do voice commands with the old one? To do dictation?
I don't think you could do dictation. It was only built into at least mine.
It works on mine last year.
Oh, yeah, so it's the old one. It was a
single port,
single microphone, and it kind of looks like it's not even like a hole. It's like a little speaker thing.
Interesting. I mean, normally the microphone's up by the camera on these as well, right?
Yeah.
So okay, so this is Haswell. This is Intel's new chip. We've talked about that at length. What are the high points of the processor architecture? What does this bring versus Ivy Bridge and Sandy Bridge?
So Haswell is a completely redesigned architecture. It's more of a talk than a tick in Intel's
okay, I don't understand talks and ticks.
What they did was they are now on a 22 nanometer process.
So it's smaller and more power
smaller,
efficient.
and which means just uses less power. And they designed it so that the TDP, the amount of power it uses at its maximum load, is lower. So
is it the amount of power it uses or the amount of power, like heat it generates?
Heat it generates.
Okay.
TDP, it's directly correlated.
Okay.
And that ties into how much battery power it would take. On the Ivy Bridge, it was 17 watts.
Okay.
On Haswell, or on Haswell, it is 15 watts.
So 2 watts.
Yes.
Less power.
2 watts less power at its maximum capacity. Also, the PCH, which is what Intel calls its platform controller hub. This is what replaced like the North Bridge when they went to the Core line.
Chipset stuff.
Yes, chipset stuff. That's also built into the package, which normally would have been outside of the package.
Oh, so it's edging closer to a system on a chip. More and more of the stuff like USB controllers and PCI Express lanes and all that stuff are getting into the CPU package themselves.
What it actually means in terms of comparing power usage is that this is going to be 25% more efficient in terms of using power.
Okay.
And
so does that mean 25% longer battery life?
theoretically, but then they also made some other changes. For
Okay.
example, they increased the battery capacity. So on the 11-inch in here, the Sandy Bridge one and the Ivy Ridge
2
one,
years old model.
2 years old and even 1 year old, it was 35 watt hour. It's actually 38 watt hours.
And is there more weight as a result of
No
that, or
more
is it
weight.
just a better, more efficient battery?
It's a bigger battery, but no more weight. And I think they saved some of that with the redesigned Haswell chipset.
Okay.
So because it's the whole board is smaller, they could fit a bigger battery.
So the other big change with Haswell is graphics.
Yes.
I guess we'll talk about that when we get to gaming in a little bit. But
Yeah, we can talk about it now too. 2 years ago, it was Intel HD 3000. Last year, it was HD 4000. This is HD 5000. It is not quite the Haswell Iris.
The top end.
The top end graphics.
Okay.
What it means though is, like in terms of NVIDIA and ATI cards, you have cores, like graphics cores. Intel's version of that are called execution units.
they're shader units, is essentially they're little processors that
Physical
can,
processors inside the chip.
Okay.
On the Ivy Bridge one, there were, I believe, 17 graphics units,
Okay.
Execution units. On Haswell Intel HD 5000, there were 40.
And-
So you're talking about more than twice the number of these execution units, but they run at a lower clock speed.
So, and then the other thing that's changed between Ivy Bridge and Haswell is that there is actually more differentiation on graphics capabilities inside the processors.
It's not just like one HD
Right.
4000. You have HD 5000, 5100 Iris, and Iris Pro, and that stuff.
So when you're buying one of these laptops, there are a couple of different CPU choices. There's a stock, which is like a 1.3 i5, I think.
Yeah, so even though there's a 13-inch and 11-inch, the stock version of those have the same CPU on
Okay.
the inside. And that's one of the reasons I kind of like the 11-inch, because I'm not sacrificing performance.
Right.
I'm actually only sacrificing screen size and battery capacity. And it's actually a little cheaper. So you're right, it is a Core i5, I think it's a 4250U Haswell processor, runs at 1.3 gigahertz. If you look at the specs at the Ivy Bridge stock CPU, that's actually slower clocked, but that makes it up because of the turbo. So
Okay.
Intel's processors naturally clock up when you're using more processor-intensive tasks. In Haswell, the i5 that starts at a 1.3 gigahertz base clock will clock up to 2.6 gigahertz when it needs to.
And that's if you're only using one of the two cores.
Yeah. Yeah,
Primarily.
and if you're not plugged in, it will use 2.3 gigahertz.
So are the graphics different? The graphics are the main thing that changes in addition to clock speed as you go up into the higher CPUs with the new Airs, right?
With the new Airs, in terms of if you want to pay more for the better CPU,
The i7.
it is an i7.
Yeah.
It is still 15 TDP, so you use the same amount of power.
Okay.
But it has a higher potential max turbo. It goes up to 3.3 gigahertz as opposed to 2.6. There's additional megabyte of L3 cache,
Okay.
and the graphics will actually clock up its max from 1 gigahertz to 1100 gigahertz. So you
Okay.
get 10% better maximum graphics performance and about, I think, another 20% CPU performance.
All in the same TDP, so it shouldn't
All in the same
impact battery
TDP,
life.
but so even though you're using potentially 15 watts at max, you're not going to be using the max as much on the slower machine than you would be on the higher machine, which has a higher base clock as well.
Gotcha.
So you would be using, you would expect if you bought two 13-inch MacBook Airs, one with the i5, one with the i7, if you're using them in its max, the i7 will drain faster.
Okay.
A couple other internal changes. They changed the solid state drive, the type of solid state drive. So in the previous MacBook Airs, it was actually a SATA based solid state
Just
drive.
like a hard drive you plug into your computer, but in mobile form factor.
SATA 3, maximum 6 gigabits per second. Here, it's actually inside its PCI Express based storage.
So
which is
instead of having a SATA controller that plugs into the PCI Express bus and you plug your hard drive or SSD into the SATA controller, now you just plug it straight into PCI Express.
yeah, it almost looks like a board with RAM chips on there, memory chips on there,
Right.
made by Samsung, and PCI Express. It has a theoretical maximum of 8 gigabits per second. Your speeds are gonna vary depending on how much capacity you buy, because the denser the capacity, the faster you get.
Right.
And really, all that means is that when you're transferring files within the drive, it's going to be faster. If you're using the Thunderbolt, if you're plugging in external storage, PCI storage,
Or USB 3
or
even.
USB 3, your transfer's going to be a little faster there.
Okay.
But really, it's all about battery life. That's the big thing.
So performance from last generation to this generation isn't going to increase appreciably, except for maybe in games.
Yeah, maybe in games. Well, definitely in games. But in terms of the CPU, it's going to be a break even.
Okay.
Yeah, it's lower clocked in some things, but it's more efficient in the way it uses clocks, more instructions per clock. Yeah.
I don't know anybody who doesn't need more battery life, though.
Everyone needs more. I mean, the reason you're buying a laptop, and while you can tether this to your power supply, and you can put an external monitor and use this as a desktop replacement, you're going to want to put it in your bag, take it to a coffee shop, and
carry it back and forth to work and home.
Exactly. Take it on a plane trip, and the first thing people do when they go to a coffee shop is look for the power outlet. Yeah. Because they know that if you bought a laptop and Apple says it gives you 5 hours of battery life, it will depend on how old the laptop is and what you actually do with it. With my Sandy Bridge MacBook Air, right now I just charged this. I'll show you. It's at 100% battery life, and its estimate, well, it's still calculating, it's not going to show more than like 3 hours. Right. Because it's a 2-year-old laptop. It says actually 1 hour and 51 minutes remaining. That's not really acceptable.
Like medium brightness,
it's
probably
medium
real
brightness,
low brightness, it looks like.
Medium brightness and not even much running on there right now.
Yeah, to give a point of reference, my year-old Ivy Bridge laptop, if I turn the brightness down to 1 or 2 chunks above the bottom, the very low setting, I can get maybe 5.5 hours out of it. But if I'm doing anything that involves any kind of processing at all, I'm not going to get anywhere near that.
Yeah, and I found that Apple's estimates of the battery life based on percentage is actually pretty accurate. Mac OS's. So here right now, on this MacBook Air, the Haswell one, the new one, which I fully charged when we started this, it's at 98% right now. It says 9 hours and 34 minutes.
That's bananas.
That's something that you just don't expect.
I mean, so part of this is that we're seeing Intel's made some big advancements in power consumption on the x86 side. Part of it has also got to be OS level improvements that Apple's made as a result of stuff they've learned from iOS and from
the OS level stuff is not going to come in until Mavericks comes out. And that's going to apply to Ivy Bridge as well, and maybe even Sandy Bridge as well, in terms of like the sleep, how much power, what happens when the computer is in sleep mode.
But I mean, one of the things they talked about with this laptop is that it sleeps essentially like a tablet or phone.
And Haswell grants it that ability, has a low power mode. But in doing normal things, so when I compute on this, I use it like I would a desktop. Tons of tabs open, I have Lightroom, Photoshop, I'm streaming video from YouTube, playing stuff on Vimeo, playing videos.
You're using your computer.
Yeah, using a real computer, and over 2 thorough days of doing these things, not leaving it unplugged and not worrying about battery life, it was about 6 hours, 45 minutes.
That's pretty good.
It's good. It's not quite Apple's 9 hours that they say, but again, their tests are more at the 75% brightness and streaming occasional videos.
I mean, rather than go out and replicate a script, you're actually just using the computer and seeing how long the battery lasts.
But what I also wanted to do was see what, very specific tasks, how different programs affected the battery life. So in terms of just playing a 720p YouTube video, playing it nonstop, nothing else running on, just streaming, 5 hours and 45 minutes.
Is that using the Flash player or the HTML5 player?
That is using the Flash player.
Okay.
So Flash player, 5 hours, 45 minutes, and then it just shuts off.
Okay.
If I'm doing something like Lightroom, which it can do, and surprisingly, this actually handles Lightroom 5 pretty well.
So how's the resolution of the screen when you're doing photo editing?
Well, we'll talk about the screen quality in just a bit, and it's one of the things that I'm not super happy with. But Lightroom's actually pretty processor intensive. When you're exporting stuff, when you're in the develop tool, it's using both your storage tier and also the processor a lot. About 4 hours and 30 minutes of nonstop development in Lightroom. And then, something like we talk about traveling with this. Right. And most of my tests I did Wi-Fi on. With Wi-Fi off, where would you have Wi-Fi off?
On the airplane.
On the airplane.
I mean,
like you flew back and you from Tennessee.
Yeah.
You used your MacBook and you did some video editing, which you can do, but you probably couldn't have done that for more than like 4 hours.
So I did about an hour of edits and then compressed, which is massively CPU intensive, and that took about an hour to run. And actually, that compression in that hour took probably half or 3/4 of the battery that I had available. And then I had another hour and a half or 2 hours on the other side of that to do other less processor intensive stuff.
Right. when I tried like a fake airplane mode, which means turning off the Wi-Fi and doing very simple tasks, just like word processing, because I'm not going to have access to Google Docs, just text edit, 10 hours of this, which is
that
great.
makes sense.
That's wonderful, which means I could, if I had this on a flight to Switzerland, a 12-hour flight,
Yeah.
I could have typed something for 12 hours.
Did you try video playback just on local files?
Yeah, local files, video playback, you get closer to 8 hours.
Okay.
So it's actually
So you can
not as intensive.
easily watch 2 movies and maybe 3, depending
And
on
also,
what you're watching.
the other thing I did when I did my fake airplane mode testing is turn down brightness, because you don't even need medium brightness.
Right, you shut the window on the airplane.
Cabin is dark. You're going to have 25-40% brightness is just fine.
That's where I'm 1 notch above, totally off.
Right. And then so gaming.
Yeah.
You can actually game on this respectably. I'm going to demonstrate this. You can actually game respectably on this.
So now you say this, but when I load up FTL on my Air from last year, the fans spin up, the whole thing gets hot, the battery life goes to hell, and FTL is not exactly, but almost a spreadsheet game. There's no 3D stuff going on there. Like, what is that going to do to battery? Are you going to be able to play games on the airplane? Is it?
I would say yes, absolutely on the airplane. Battery life is still terrible when you're playing games.
Yeah.
For example, something like Team Fortress 2 or StarCraft, which it's a multiplayer game.
You're not going to play those on the airplane.
Not on the airplane, but even if I'm like at a coffee shop playing that on Wi-Fi, about 2 hours, 1 hour and 50 minutes before the graphics really shut down. Because
and is that with like a Bluetooth mouse connected and stuff like that?
That's with a wired mouse, actually.
Okay.
I'm just going to quickly load this up. Maybe this won't work, but trust me, in medium settings, Team Fortress 2, 60 FPS.
Playable.
Playable on this 11-inch resolution. It's going to differ when you're on the 13-inch.
Right.
Of course, slightly down, lower.
Slightly more pixels.
Yeah. I'll just start a practice session offline. Okay. You can play against bots.
Yeah. Because there's nothing I love more than playing against bots. I just want to comment on the played time there.
I haven't played this in a very long time, and
insane.
It's a lot of soldier. You talk about heat. So when you're playing games, which we could do on Ivy Bridge, we demonstrated that last year. Team Fortress 2 is an old game. StarCraft 2 is kind of an old game now. It got really warm on your Ivy Bridge. On the Haswell, did not get that warm.
So is it because the CPU is not, like stuff that's not being used isn't turned on all the way?
I think that's because with Haswell, with the graphics, you have more of these execution units, 2.5 times as many as with Ivy Bridge. They're all running at a lower base clock at 200 megahertz as opposed to 350 megahertz. And so you're running more graphics execution units in parallel and using that as opposed to ramping up your frequency, which is what will lead to heat.
So it's like if you get in your car and you go at 15 miles an hour, you're going to get a lot further than if you go at 60 miles an hour.
Yes, and look here. I'm running TF2. It's showing about 40, 45 FPS right now, and completely smooth.
That is not bad.
Completely playable.
It's the camera's still on me, I think.
And
I'm just going to keep looking at the.
You just have to trust us.
Yeah, it looks fine. Okay, so last few things.
You did screen?
Screen.
Same resolution screen, same panel. This is still a TN panel.
If there's one thing that I don't like about my 13-inch MacBook Air, it is that the panel is not particularly good, especially like not even compared to really amazing panels like Retina displays and the quad resolution displays we're starting to see on Windows, but just compared to a decent IPS panel, it's bad.
A lot of people kind of wondered why Apple didn't put a Retina display on their Airs, and if you think about it, it makes sense. When you're talking about a quadrupling number of pixels, you need a brighter backlight. That's going to kill your battery. They chose battery life over a high resolution display. But even not taking into account resolution, Apple being ahead of its supply curve and being tapped into the supply in China very, very closely, they should be able to provide a better display for their MacBook Airs than what's on here right now. This is a TN panel, which looks okay.
TN is just to be clear, IPS and TN are types of LCD display panels. It has to do with the way that the colors are generated, and IPS is typically a little bit slower, but produces a better quality and less dithering and stuff like that, whereas the TN usually is a little bit noisier.
It gets very bright. The horizontal viewing angles, I'm showing just a photo here, I think are okay, but there you go, see it turns, already you can see the color is kind of shifting. It's the vertical. Just the amount of brightness, how washed out the image gets.
There's a sweet spot that you want to be in front of.
And that's so weird because you don't want to have to find that sweet spot on a MacBook Air, especially because you're going to be using it in different orientations. You're going to be using it on the couch, using it in bed, using it on the airplane, in which you're at different levels of like recline.
Right.
And it doesn't actually, the screen doesn't go all the way back. And so finding that sweet spot is just a hassle that I don't want to have to do.
It's less of a problem with the 11, I would think, on the plane. With the 13, sometimes if the guy in front of me reclines, I just have to put the laptop away because I can't get the screen at an angle that I can see it and not have it crushed
have to like kind
by
of,
the, I mean, I'm tall too, which doesn't help.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'd love to see better screen. Personally, 5 hours of battery life is I think, an okay place to be. I would have happily traded for 4 hours of battery off of the top of this guy for a Retina-esque panel or even a better IPS panel.
Maybe next year. Yeah. There's still no SD card reader on the 11-inch. There's only on the 13-inch.
I think that's just, if you've looked at the internals of that thing,
yeah,
I understand why it's
limitation.
Full.
I mean, like, it is packed. I mean, I don't know where they could put it. Maybe right here. It is USB 3.
Two ports?
Two USB 3 ports,
okay.
And it has the camera in the front. It really is just the big difference between last year and this year is battery life.
What's the resolution on the panel? It's
1366 by 768,
okay.
And then it's 1400 by 900 on the 13-inch. And I think if they were to give it a different panel, they'd want to quad resolution it, just like they have with the Pros.
A couple other questions. Does this support the new Thunderbolt update? Does this include the updated Thunderbolt, the Generation 2 stuff?
I'm not sure if it does. I want to say yes, it does. I have to look that up. This does have 802.11ac,
right?
But people who've tested, I don't have a 802.11ac router. OS 10 needs to be patched before it can tap on that fully.
And they haven't released the update
and
yet?
They have not released the update.
And I mean, frankly, AC is not a finished spec yet. Like it's close. There are draft routers out, but I mean, we generally don't recommend people buy those until they're actually the specs finalized, because who knows if stuff's going to work right or if it's going to change between now and when it's finalized.
So the model I got specifically, the base model is $1,000, and that has the Core i5 that we mentioned, that has 4 gigs of RAM, same as last year, and they bumped up storage to 128 gigs.
Which is awesome.
That's
much
awesome,
needed.
because storage is expensive.
Right.
If you want to buy the in-store high-end model, that's an additional $200. That gives you 256 gigs of storage. I recommend going for higher storage, paying $200, because that's actually a fair price to pay. It used to be $300, difference between 128 and 256.
Even at $300, 128 is...
I would say 30% of the price of a laptop as an increase for that much storage is a lot.
It depends on what you use the laptop for. If you are using it as your secondary computer that you carry around to take notes and stuff like that, that's one thing. Get the cheapest one possible. If you're going to use that as your primary desktop and you do any kind of photo or video work, you're going to run out of space crazy fast with 128 gigs.
And then I also went with 8 gigs of RAM as opposed to 4 gig of RAM, and really,
which will impact your battery life a little bit.
A little bit. It's actually a newer type of DDR3 RAM, which supposedly increases efficiency. What all of these upgrades do, the battery life, the extra storage, extra RAM, is give you this peace of mind. You never have to worry.
Right.
So with 256 gigs of storage, you never have to be checking your hard drive or the solid state drive and worried about how many gigs you have left. Should I synchronize all my Spotify songs on locally, because that's going to take a lot of space? Should I synchronize all my iPhoto photos, all my photo stream stuff, because that's going to take storage? Having the extra RAM means you don't have to worry when you're doing photo editing or running lots of tabs. And then the extra battery means you don't have to worry throughout the day, and you're not glancing constantly at the battery percentage indicator, because you know you'll be able to get through several hours, at least 5 hours of normal work.
Well, and that's the beautiful thing about this type of laptop. These are firmly competitive with the Ultrabooks on the PC side. We're just starting to see the Haswell stuff come out on the Ultrabook side. I think some of the Pac Rim companies have released theirs, but even Lenovo and HP haven't rolled theirs out yet. So we'll see what happens with that later this year. Would you recommend this laptop, Norm?
It's a very, very interesting situation right now. The extra battery life, it transforms the way you think of a laptop, because it makes it more like the phone. Like my iPhone or the HTC One has good battery life. You're charging it once a day.
Right.
When you sleep, or some people charge it on their drive to work. This takes an hour and 50 minutes or so to charge fully. I'm only charging this once a day. I'm using it at a desk here, using it places not plugged in.
I haven't seen you plug it in while you've been at the office, except for
and you don't have to worry about, when you sit down, the first thing you do is look for a power outlet.
Right.
You can use it a full day, charge it overnight. It's like a phone that way. it's not like a tablet in the sense that it's every few days or every week or so, because that's just how much more efficient ARM is with that capacity.
I mean, depending on how much you use a tablet and whether you play games and stuff, you may be charging it every day. But in my experience with an iPad or an Nexus 7, if you miss a day, it's no big deal. You'll usually be okay.
Once a day is, I think, very reasonable. We're now getting past that once a day lifespan for a laptop. I don't think this is quite there yet, because like I said, 6 hours, 45 minutes. I'm working 8-hour days. I would like it to be closer to actually really 9 hours. I think next year, it's tough to anticipate what Apple's going to do. This body design, like we said, 2010, 2011, 2012, this is a 4th gen with this body.
They've been sticking with it. Like, it seems like they like their designs, and they've been sticking with them for much longer than they have in the past. I don't think there's anything wrong with the design.
I don't think there's anything wrong with the design. I think that next year we're going to see a better panel. Yeah. Next year, if they do a big OS update, we might see some touch stuff integrated. I think that battery being a big selling point this year is fine, but I could anticipate some really groundbreaking things coming next year.
Well, battery's a real workhorse kind of upgrade.
It is. And you can't, you got to give Apple and Intel credit for able to merge the software and the hardware to get this amount of battery life. I think if you bought an Ivy Bridge laptop last year, there's no reason you should buy this.
Absolutely not.
Upgrading once a year for laptops is silly. If you bought a Sandy Bridge, like I did, I still wouldn't upgrade to this because I would want to wait that extra year.
But if you're on the initial rev of this hardware design, then it's definitely time to upgrade.
Like when Gary,
the very first
bought a Core 2 Duo, MacBook Air, then this is a perfect upgrade.
Yeah, it's a wonderful laptop.
You've spent your $1,000, lasted 3 years. That's about $1 a day in terms of using your laptop. It's time for an upgrade.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Norm. So that's the MacBook Air 11-inch 2013 edition, I guess is what they're probably calling it. It's mid-2013?
2013, if you search mid-2013, 4th generation MacBook Air with Haswell.
Yeah, and it's definitely the one to buy right now. We'll see you guys later.
Bye.